Hayley's pulse hammered against her temples as she knelt beside Bill's collapsed body, the sterile office lights reflecting sharply off the polished floor beneath him. Her hands hovered inches above his shoulder, trembling with a confusion she refused to acknowledge. Weeks of secret calculations had led to this exact moment, yet her lungs tightened as if every breath were a betrayal of her own resolve. Bill remained motionless, his body curled awkwardly, the final posture of a man who never expected the ground to rise up beneath him. The office felt too quiet, too still, the air thickened by the weight of what she had set into motion. Her mind flashed through the choices that had carved the path to this instant, the late nights studying his schedule, the precisely measured doses mixed into drinks he rarely questioned, the steady decline in his energy that he blamed on stress. Every step had felt clinical, deliberate, almost distant. She had rehearsed every outcome except the way her chest now constricted, as though the sight of him collapsed under the harsh fluorescent lights had awakened something she thought long dead. Under this cold brightness, the reality of her actions finally emerged from the shadows she had forced it into. She struggled to interpret her own reaction. Fear, satisfaction, regret, each emotion clawed at her with equal ferocity. Outside the office door, the hallway remained silent, and she found herself both grateful and unsettled by the isolation. A camera blinked faintly in the corner of the ceiling, its red indicator steady, capturing every flicker of movement, every tremor of her fingers. Only 2 people existed in the frame, and she was aware that every nuance of her posture would be preserved, ready to be interpreted by anyone who viewed the footage later. The knowledge pressed into her spine, forcing her to consider how her body might look, the tension in her jaw, the nervous shifts of her weight, the restless movements that betrayed her attempt at composure. A sudden heat surged beneath her skin. She had spent years watching Bill accumulate influence, maneuver his allies, and manipulate the people around him with quiet condescension. She had endured the subtle dismissals, the calculated belittling, the heavy presence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Her resentment had not grown in sharp bursts, but had accumulated like sediment, thickening, hardening, until something inside her could no longer bend. What lay before her now was the outcome of pressure compressed beyond tolerance. Yet seeing him weakened, powerless, incapable of deflecting consequences, stirred a primal anger that did not match the panic in her expression. She knew she had not been alone in her suffering. The household had been steeped in tension long before she decided to take control. Assumptions, secrets, unspoken resentment piled up between walls that rarely echoed with warmth. His relentless ambition had eclipsed any semblance of partnership, leaving her to navigate a life shaped by his whims. She had learned to adapt, to survive, to plan quietly. But she had never imagined how emotion would entangle itself with strategy, threatening to unravel her discipline when she most needed it. Bill's fingers twitched faintly, the slightest spark of movement cutting through the haze enveloping her thoughts. A rush of conflicting reactions tore through her, relief tangled with dread. The possibility of him waking brought an onslaught of what-ifs she had not fully considered. If he survived enough to question, enough to remember, enough to accuse, her carefully constructed plan would fracture instantly. And yet, beneath that fear resided an undeniable satisfaction, the instinctive response to seeing the once dominant figure reduced to frailty. The mixture of emotions churned violently, destabilizing the control she had clung to for weeks. She forced herself to step back, as if distancing her body could distance her from responsibility. Her mind raced through contingencies, next steps, possible explanations, how long she needed him to remain unconscious, how soon help might arrive if she initiated it. The decisions multiplied, each carrying weight, each possessing the potential to spiral out of control. Every second she hesitated tightened the noose around her own intentions. A miscalculation now could undo everything she had endured to reach this moment. Images flashed through her memory, fragments of the choices that had led her here. The meetings she had overheard, the financial secrets she had pieced together with reluctant clarity, the betrayals she had suspected long before she confirmed them. A network of hidden agendas had surrounded Bill, and she had found herself trapped within its machinery, threatened by decisions she had no part in. The poison she administered had been both an act of protection and destruction, a blurred attempt to reclaim agency in a world that had systematically stripped it away. The deeper she ventured into her recollections, the more her fury resurfaced, raw and unfiltered. The camera light continued blinking, steady and indifferent, its silent recording shaping the narrative she would eventually have to confront. She scanned the office with rising tension, the scattered folders on his desk, the mug still half full of coffee that she had deliberately avoided tampering with that morning, the faint imprint on the carpet where he must have stood before collapsing, all pieces of a scene that would be dissected. She imagined investigators pausing the footage, analyzing her posture, her movements, her hesitation. The thought injected a new pulse of adrenaline into her bloodstream. Her gaze dropped back to Bill. His breathing was shallow, uneven, each rise of his chest a reminder that the line between success and disaster remained dangerously thin. She felt the echo of her earlier resolve whispering that she should have done more, acted more decisively, cut off all possibility of survival. But something inside her recoiled at the cruelty of such finality. She had wanted control, not necessarily an irreversible outcome. Yet control now seemed to slip further from her grasp as uncertainty crept across her vision like spreading fog. For a moment, she imagined a version of herself untouched by resentment, untainted by plotting, unburdened by the secrets she carried. But that alternate self felt impossibly distant, replaced by a woman shaped by survival, calculation, and wounds inflicted long before she admitted to them. Her decisions tonight were not impulsive. They were the culmination of years spent navigating a life that demanded silence. The realization only deepened her internal conflict, pulling her between guilt and justification, fear and vindication. Her stomach tightened as footsteps echoed faintly from down the hallway, distant but approaching. Panic gripped her, urging her to move, to decide. She forced herself upright, wiping her palms on her skirt, steadying her breath. The weight of the situation pressed onto her shoulders with suffocating heaviness. She debated whether to call for help immediately or to stage the scene with a layer of emotional authenticity that could shield her from suspicion. Each option carried consequences she struggled to fully calculate, each path branching into dozens of potential outcomes. Hayley felt the pressure of the moment compress her thoughts into a single point of determination. She could not allow fear to erode the strategy she had built with such meticulous effort. If she faltered now, everything she had endured would be for nothing. Yet, in the depths of her chest, an ache twisted violently, a lingering thread of attachment she had tried desperately to sever. She despised the vulnerability it implied, the possibility that part of her still cared whether Bill survived. Bill's shallow breaths persisted, fragile as the thin line of self-control restraining her panic. She moved toward the desk, her eyes flicking to the clock on the wall, noting how much time had passed since he fell. Too much, perhaps? Not enough, perhaps. Her mind spiraled, caught between decisive action and paralyzing dread. The office suddenly felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls themselves judged every second of her hesitation. Her fists clenched involuntarily, nails digging into her palms. Anger surged again, at Bill, at herself, at the circumstances that had forced her into this impossible convergence of desperation and responsibility. Her rage tasted metallic, burning through her veins, and for a fleeting moment she felt empowered by it. But the power was unstable, fleeting, crumbling the moment she looked back at his still form on the floor. The approaching footsteps grew louder. A voice, not words, only the sound of someone speaking to another, carried through the hallway. Hayley's pulse spiked. The moment for indecision was gone. She stepped back into the camera's field, positioned herself between Bill and the door, and forced her body to mimic the frantic panic she felt and the guilt she feared. Every gesture mattered now, every breath, every detail that an outsider would interpret later. Her internal world churned violently. She questioned whether the fear gripping her came from the possibility of being discovered or from the realization that she had crossed a line she could never retreat from. The boundaries of morality dissolved beneath her feet, replaced by the irreversible consequences of choices made under pressure. Her heart felt split between vindication and horror, each beat intensifying the storm swirling within her. The footsteps stopped outside the door. She exhaled, her breath trembling in the cold, sterile air of the office, and braced herself for whatever came next.